We are moving on to our final quarter. This one needs to be a tall frame, so you may need to rotate your board to make sure that it is indeed a portrait mode, so a tall, skinny frame. And you're going to start off the same way you've started pretty much all these drawings, with a horizon line and a vanishing point. And I'm placing my horizon line a little bit below the vanishing point. And then I'm going to do essentially what I did for that first road drawing. So I'm drawing kind of a wide splayed road. You have to note where the curb is ending, because that's what we're drawing here, 2 lines to indicate the curb. And the curb is ending before it hits the corner, so it's just above the corner on either side. And then you can erase that out. So the road's going back to that point, and you can see and feel like the road's going back into space. We're going to go to the curb, and you're going to make that curb wider. So essentially you're making that the sidewalk, and you do this to both the left and the right hand side, and you want to make sure that they are about the equal width apart, left versus right. And then we're going to start to draw in our buildings. So we're going to need to put in a couple of vertical lines. The first one goes all the way off the frame. The second one doesn't quite go off. And then we close off the shape. The buildings are an extension of the block exercise that we started off with. They are like a block. They're just aligned up to a singular vanishing point. The tricky part is telling yourself that one of the sides angles back to that single vanishing point. The other side is going to be a horizontal line without an angle to it. So you can see I'm drawing in vertical lines. I'm connecting the vertical line to the vanishing point, and I'm closing off the shape, that block, with a horizontal line on the left-hand side only. The right-hand side of every building is angling back to that 1 point perspective single vanishing point. There are a couple of buildings in the background, and they are actually overlapped by the buildings in front. So I started the same way with a couple of vertical lines, and then I close off. The left-hand side of the building is not going to be in perspective, so it's a horizontal line. The right-hand side would attach to the vanishing point. So we are drawing a road with buildings to either side. So we're starting off with the left-hand side, and then we're going to move over to the right-hand side in a bit. So I'm just finishing drawing in the buildings in the background, so in the distance. Some of those barely have a second side. There may be one there that doesn't. It's just kind of like a silhouette. And then we're going to be moving on to the doorways and windows within the buildings. And you want to realize that there is a gap between a lot of these buildings, that they're not all touching. And if you have a gap, you have to put a horizontal line at the top and at the bottom there. So to draw in windows or doorways, in this case there's a doorway and then followed by a couple of arched kind of windows, you have to go to the vanishing point and you have to space them out correctly. So the doorways or the windows that are closest to the vanishing point should be narrow. As they move away from the vanishing point, they should get successively taller and wider. So I'm actually reducing the number. There were 3 there, and I just reduced it to 2. Sometimes it's hard to fit in stuff in tight spaces. You can do the same. And there are more windows on the top part too. So I'm going to do 3 little lines there. Those 3 lines indicate the bottom of the window sill. And I'm going to do that to the top too. And those windowsill bottoms do align up with the vanishing point. And then the tops do as well. So you can see I'm rotating or pivoting off of that vanishing point to get the top. And then they do have a slight curve to them, like an arc. So I'm going to freehand draw that. And it's not perfect, but that's okay. That second building to the left does have like kind of a rooftop that sticks out, so it kind of extends beyond the building. So I've drawn 3 lines there, and I'm just going to extend that out beyond. It's kind of like this pagoda type roof. And then I'm going to line that up with the vanishing point so that little peaked roof goes beyond the building just slightly. So artists who are good at this will put in a lot of detail. They'll look for those little exciting detail bits and put those in. You are welcome to do that too. There are some signs on the buildings. I didn't put every single sign, but I put a few in, so I'm putting in a couple of signs that kind of helps make it look authentic, like it's actually lived in. And there were kind of these heavy looking bricks or like stone, big blocks of stone that compose like the bottom half of that building, so I'm putting that in too, and I'm making sure to stagger those vertical lines to break up that kind of like pattern. You can also just look at that and eyeball it, but those stones would have to conform to that vanishing point. It does help to shade in the darker side. Remember we talked about a cube having a light side, a medium side, and a dark side. Here you're only seeing two sides of the cube or the building. So one side would be in shadow, one side would be in light. So it's the left-hand side that's in shadow, which is why I'm going there to shade it in. It actually helps the perspective if you do that. And I'm just using kind of a diagonal hatch there. So that helps to reinforce the perspective and that sense of depth. It also helps me to keep track of where I am in the drawing so I don't get lost or overwhelmed. So you are going to continue to put some windows and some more detail on here. You don't have to put a ton of detail in, although it is extra credit if you do that. There's a little kind of like awning or porch thing that's sticking out beyond that building, that second building there. There's a funny little sign there. And then there's a whole bunch of windows. So those windows, you can see me pivoting off of that point. I pivot like on the hands of a clock, and I use a pencil point to pivot to get that the angle correct on those windows. So the right hand side of the building must subscribe to 1 point perspective. So it's going to that vanishing point. Now you don't have to put in every single window. I'm not going to make you do that. But it is important that you get the gist of it. And that's true of a finished work too, is like you don't have to do detail everywhere, but you do in the important areas where it's close to you, close to the viewer. Now we're going to move on to the right-hand side of the street, and we're going to start off with that first building, which I noticed is a little bit wider than the first building on the left-hand side, so I'm deliberately making that a little bit wider. And then I'm looking at the angle on the top, and I'm drawing that in. And you can see the left-hand side of the building is subscribing to 1 point perspective. It's going back to a vanishing point. So this building, you can't see the right-hand side, so the whole building is going to that singular vanishing point. And same deal with those alcoves. You're going to be using the vanishing point to get the top and the bottom. They have to be angling back. You can see them getting progressively smaller as they go back too. They should also get skinnier as they go towards that point as well. And it does, again, help to shade in some of that, otherwise it becomes confusing. Now above those alcoves, there's going to be a couple of windows too. So same deal. In fact, I lined up the alcoves with the windows as it is in the picture. And you use the top and bottom of the windows to the vanishing point to get that perspective correct. And then I free-handed the curves on the top. Now there is another building there, so there's a big building in the front, and then there's a couple of other buildings down the road. On that building, you can see a little bit of the right-hand side. The right-hand side is not in perspective, so you would use a horizontal line to close off that shape. The left-hand side does angle back to the vanishing point. And I am checking like the size of each building because they get progressively shorter, although it's possible to have a taller building off in the distance too. So these drawings don't have to be overly complex. They don't have to have windows on all of them, but I do want you to get kind of a sense of the city, so the gist of it, particularly on the buildings that are up front close. If you wanted to get the lines on the sidewalk, you would make sure that you are using a horizontal line there, and it works almost like the railroad tracks would, that those lines get progressively tighter and closer together as they go towards the vanishing point. And it does help to also shade in the road, give that some value. And if you have extra time, put in more detail, more shading. It'll earn you some extra credit.